Welcome to the Biotech Startups podcast by Xcelience. Join us as we speak with first-time founders, serial entrepreneurs, and experienced investors about the challenges and triumphs of running a biotech startup, from pre-seed to IPO, with your host, John Chi. In our last episode, we spoke with Derek Hennecke about his transition from commercial roles to full operations, managing a challenging site in Egypt, and the teamwork that turned it around. We also touched on his move to a biologic site in Montreal and the significant hurdles he faced there. Lastly, we discussed the entrepreneurial journey of buying out a business and founding Xcelience. If you missed it, be sure to go back and listen to part 3. In part 4, we talk to Derek about what it was like building and scaling Xcelience, from leveraging innovative technology to disrupt the market, to navigating the impact of the 2008 recession. We'll also touch on his experience with strategic buy-side and sell-side transactions, his commitment to continuous learning, and his transition into investing and work as a board member.
And so as you are, you're building out this business model, can you just talk about the state of the market and how Xcelience, kind of disrupted the status quo or found the opportunity set, and how did you attack that?
Yeah, so from the period from 2006 until 2010, it was using this technology to disrupt the market. Traditionally, back then, it was to do a full formulation with the excipients, stability studies, and it would take time and money to get a early phase 1 capsule. Xcelience allowed you to just put the API directly into the capsule and go for it. And then if your product was successful, then come back and do the formulation development, which of course now we had experience with the molecule and we had that contact with the customer, so we could offer that afterwards. But we disrupted the market by being the first company to allow customers to do that. And our competitors weren't very happy with it. One said, "Why are you doing this? You're screwing it for all of us." And I said, "Well, we'll see you in the market. And I'm not here to look after your employees."
Yeah. Exactly.
So that was very disruptive, and we added another machine and another machine, and continued to grow with that area by doing that. And then another disruption we started just before there was the Great Recession of 2010 was now customers were asking us to do the clinical packaging and then also the distribution to the sites. So we bought a site in Tampa, and we continued with that also with an operation in the UK. So that was disruptive too. We were one of the very first companies to do that. And that added another third of our company when we sold was clinical packaging and distribution. So that was disruptive. And then we hit the wall in 2010.
Yeah, that's a big wall for everybody. You mentioned something that was interesting, is an acquisition that you made. Was this your first acquisition on the buy side, or in previous roles did you have M&A experience as well?
No, we made we built a place in the UK, and then finally, in 2016, I was successful in bringing in the micronization. So that was after the recession, but we'd come to the finish line on a couple of companies throughout that period. And in the end, for one reason or the other, the acquisitions didn't come through. But finally, in 2016, we were able to buy a part of powder size to do micronization. And so it was quite long. So I guess it took full 10 years before we were successful in making an acquisition.
Oh, wow. And can you talk a little bit about that experience? Like, one, how did you approach we talked a little bit about the financing of Xcelience in the very early days. What was the strategy on financing the acquisition and making sure, again, we talked a little bit about making sure there was a fit. Can you just talk a little bit about that experience for you?
Yeah, so we built up enough cash reserves, and both companies were profitable, so we could borrow money against the profitability of both companies on that one. So the financing was not as big an issue as the chemistry. And I'd known the founders of Powder Size since 2011. And so just building up, knowing each other, they were watching us, we were watching them, and knowing their technology. So there's still basically only 2 micronization companies in the United States. One is owned by a large, very, very large company. And then there's Powder Size. There was Powder Size. And between the two, the larger one was probably spending more money on marketing and better known, but powder size had better technology and made its own mills, made its own micronization mill. So it was very technical. And I made a bid to buy that other smaller piece of that other one, and was unsuccessful. But I was lucky to be able to build up a relationship with the founders of powder size and understand their competitive advantage, that they technically made a better product, better understanding of micronization.
Very cool. And I love, I'm always curious about like the kind of like the run up to eventual joinings of companies. And it always, like, it sounds, based on kind of listening to these stories, it's like they start with like just like working together and then just kind of observing. And sometimes people just, see the press release goes out and it's like, but yes, these are like usually long-standing relationships that you kind of get a feel for each other's culture and the technology and making sure that it's complementary. And after this acquisition, I think that, the tables turned. You were on the sell side on the, can you talk about a little bit about the run up to that?
That's also the same message that Capsugel had been following us for many years. We'd been buying their equipment. They realized that it'd be good to have the service provider of the equipment as well. And so I knew probably 20 people inside of Capsugel who understood what Xcelience was doing. And that's a great story too. I wasn't in the market to sell Xcelience because we literally had just closed on buying part of powder size and was wanting to start integration when Capsugel came and said, well, we'd like to buy you and here's the price. And I laughed. I told, again, I'm back to the family, and I told my management team, and I said, look what we're worth. Isn't it great? Imagine what we're going to be worth in 5 years. And I was surprised by everybody saying, what do you mean 5 years? We should sell now. Like, now. Yeah. And I was hurt, of course, because you think, well, don't you have confidence in what's going to happen in 5 years? And it was a feeling like, well, if you don't want to be here, then don't be here. I didn't say that, but that's what you're kind of going through your head. But good people on the management team explain, and we went through it. And Lyndon Fellows was my chief operating officer. He said, look, you went through a pretty bad recession in 2010. That was 2016, 2016. What's next? Do you want to go through it again? And we're at a certain size too, where the market was changing, and it'd be good to be part of a big company. Capsugel was a great buyer. They were great reputation, and I know we would be doing well under them. I trusted them that they would conclude a deal. That's important too, because if you're not going to conclude a deal as a small company, you will take a step back in your performance that year because you spent so much time on the transaction. So everything came together, and I'm glad. We did do a small process just to make sure that we would get to the finish line that I promised a couple of other bidders, a couple of other companies that were interested in our company, that they could also, if I was to sell, I'd let them have a look. And in the end, finished with Capsugel. I'm very happy that they'd worked out that way for the company and for the employees.
Absolutely. And I think going through 2008 must have been just like, and these, it's all cycles too. Just like, you got another one in you, like and then, look at where, what we just are kind of gone through / going through, it's just kind of this thing. It's like, do you have another one in you? And I guess now that, you went through that process and you're on the sell side, for any of the founders who are, or, business owners who are contemplating a sale, are there any like key considerations or common pitfalls or tips really for anyone who's embarking on that journey to have an effective sales process?
Yeah, it's a completely different thing than entrepreneurs are typically doing. So Bolden can say, get as much advice from as many people as possible, and talk through the terms, and they have their own language. It's much more than just the price, and there's a lot of catches, a lot of pitfalls, earnouts and share swaps and things. So I think the most important thing is get as much advice. Even though we had a dedicated couple of buyers for us, I brought in an investment banker to help That acts as a buffer because you're going to have to work with the buyer. You want to make sure that there's a buffer who's acting as the go-between sometimes, who understands the delay, and he can advise the buyer and advise the sellers, bring things together, and I think make sure that you really, this is like a real commitment. You're getting married. You are going to sell. I think it was interesting in the last 2 years, there've been a lot of failed sales, and I don't understand that because you've put so much effort into the sale process. Your company has taken a step back. Now the whole world knows that you've been up for sale, so your customers are a bit more nervous. It is. If you're going to sell, be 99% for sure that you're going to sell.
Yeah, and a couple things that like stood out to me is like kind of having that one conviction in what you're doing, because it's like almost like the same decision as like founding a company. It is, right? But it's another like of monumental size. Just like you're selling your baby, and I can putting myself in your shoes of having those conversations. Like, look at this price. Like, we got think about this in 5 years, and then they're like, "What are you talking about?" And it's almost kind of like calling your baby ugly. You're just like, yeah. It's kind of you're just like, oh, I feel kind of personally offended here. Like, what do you? But once you get that conviction, I think it's incredibly important because, like, there's no like takebacks. Like once you make that decision. And something that stood out to me too is I would also say on the fundraising side, in addition to running a process for a sale, it can be just incredibly distracting from the operate, like your company. Everyone just like had their eye off the ball, and it can just be debilitating. So I like the idea of having someone who can help you and kind of act as that buffer. Not that they're going to take the onus of all the work, but having someone that can kind of like be a little bit of a in between is incredibly valuable. And so you end up selling the company, and did you know at that point in time you're like going to the Bahamas, or what was it? What was going through your mind at that time?
I thought a lot of energy. I like Capsugel. I thought that I could stay on with Capsugel going forward. I stayed for another year and a half. And I thought, yeah, this is, I'd had the experience with a big company, and I thought that I could go back. So I really thought, definitely, I thought that I would stay in Capsugel, and that didn't happen. Once you've been the boss, it's really hard to go back into a box, and somebody else is making decisions for your baby, which you don't agree with, or you don't see it the same way. But it's not your company anymore.
Yeah,
It's too late. You made your decision. So
yeah, it's kind of two other businesses where I can kind of see it from the outside, is like with like Starbucks, where
Howard Schultz he won't leave, will he?
yeah. He keeps going back, but he's like, I promise, I'm done.
Yeah,
like, he's back. Or like Bob Iger at Disney, he's like, yeah, all right, I'm back. Like, put me back in. Like, but exactly what you said is kind of,
it's ego.
It's hard.
It's ego or something. But another good friend of mine, who's the CEO of Boston PX, he was bought at the same time by a competitor to Capsugel, and he was out within 3 months. And we've had discussions, and that was the right thing for him. As for me, I did get the chance to go back, actually. In December 2021, Lonza, new owners of Capsugel, came to me and asked if I'd like to buy back part of what I had sold to them. The micronization business in Quakertown, Pennsylvania was hard to fit into Lonza. I immediately called the founder of Powder Size, TJ Higley, and asked if he'd like to put back the band together. TJ thought I meant to start a brand new micronization business from scratch. But we pulled together some industry insiders and rebranded Powder Size as Microsize in 2022. Now the third time is a charm, and I get to choose the people I like to work with. I don't know if it's going back so much as we hardly had the chance the first time in 2025.
It's hard. It's super hard. It's just like, and so, now you're like, okay, I don't see the future for myself at Capsugel. I know, at this point in time, you went back to school for further studies. And also, right. I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is kind of the beginning of like investing in a lot of board work that you're doing. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like one, the decision, like you talk about, being the boss and, making a transition to being put into the box, which is probably, not something you want to do. But going back to school, that's like, that's also
going way back.
Yeah, going way back. And then it's a different kind of box, but so can you talk a little about school, your, furthering your education, investing in board work that you got involved with?
Yeah, so I went on a lot of helping out companies, private equity companies, to look at due diligence, doing due diligences, looking at companies, and my own investment in companies, and realized that I felt a little bit like a fraud. I'd left molecular biology back in the 80s.
Yeah.
And not only was it old, but it was wrong.
Back then, the textbooks have changed. Yeah.
Yeah. But it wasn't like we build on the shoulders of giants. It was really more like, no, those shoulders are
wrong shoulders.
Wrong shoulders.
Yeah, totally.
So I did a complete reset, and I didn't know really where to start. So I went to do a master's in science in Boston, with trying to create some structure of what the pieces would be, just as a way to get back. The difference in the box question you mentioned is that when I went to school back in the 80s and 90s, it was very much I need it for my career. I need to get this degree for my career, to show somebody on a resume that I've done this. And now in my stage of my life, I'm doing it because I really want to learn that stuff. So I put more time into each course to be that annoying old guy to learn that.
People in the back, they're just like, oh, not again, Derek. Like,
move it.
Yeah.
But now you do it for different reasons, so it felt different. And now the subject matters are it's just so mind blowing what we've done in the last 20 years in cell biology, epigenetics, virology, CRISPR. Everything is it's not only techniques, but what we can do with those approaches, which is fascinating. And
I love that. And I love the kind of, as you're investing, you're like, felt like a fraud. And you're like, no, like, yeah. And you're just like, how am I going to solve this? And that, I love that, because it's, again, it's just like, how do you level up? And you talked about, you started off in sales, you did BD, you did product management, you got into ops, where even though it's just like, you're like, why do you want to get into ops? And you're just like, because I want to learn, and I want to, and it doesn't stop. Like, it sounds like it, clearly it doesn't stop. You're refreshing the kind of your molecular biology understanding and bring it to today. And can you talk a little bit about how you bring your wealth of experience, and now you're on the 2020 go forward understanding of, science, how you bring that to your investing, and how do you bring that to your board work?
I think it's confidence in, look, when you're making investments, you're making a guess, definitely. You're making a call, and in the end, you have to make a call. You can't not make a call on something. Even not deciding to invest in something is a call. So you owe it to everybody around you to do your best on keeping current, and then giving an opinion, and putting it out there that it's their responsibility to agree with your opinion based on your experience, or to disagree with you. You can't take that responsibility away from them and the board. But at least that they know what you brought to the table, which is this last degree, for example, and that helps. I cannot give a specific, but in one board meeting, a decision was made to not get into a product because of misunderstanding of the risks of bringing that product into the plant. And I said, no, actually, the technology's moved on, and now we don't deal with live viruses anymore. We're dealing with it was really early days. We're dealing with mRNA, and I had to explain to the board what that was, and I could speak from a confidence rather than from a newspaper, as we were learning on the fly, that it was a safe product and that we could, really bring this product in, and that was a good decision. So that happens almost every month, where I think the worst thing is to be a very quiet board member. And what I learned from the Dutch is that you got to put your opinion out there and be very frank and say, this is what is happening. And that's difference between the Americans, where in the United States we say, well, maybe this, maybe that, or you're trying to be careful, but put it out there. Board meetings only last 3-4 hours a day. You don't have time to waffle, and you got to put it out there. But their responsibility is to make a decision based on that. Does that kind of help? So
Absolutely.
Forward, and the other thing is we're going to be living a lot longer than our parents did. So I think if you don't stay current, you're going to be you're going to be left on the sidelines. I feel like sometimes I have another 30 years left in me. So what do I do for the next 30 years? I don't like playing golf. So you got to stay current.
Likewise.
Yeah. We have more than 30 years.
Yeah. But like, when my friend, my co-founder is a big golfer, and he's like, come on, John, like, let's go. And I'm like, I'm okay. Like, I'll catch you afterwards. Or maybe if I go with you, I'm going to be in the golf. I'll do the golf cart.
I'll drive
the golf cart. Yeah, exactly. And that's really interesting. So with all this wealth of, you're very active on boards, so there's a lot of our listeners are perhaps, this is their first go at working with a board, running board meetings. And you talked a little bit about like as a board member, putting your opinion out there, and then obviously letting management make the decision. Can you just, in your opinion, what makes for a productive and effective board of directors? And then one level down, what's an effective and productive board meeting, in your opinion? So
the board members have to earn their right at the table. It cannot be because they put money in. Certainly, if they put money in, they can demand a right to be on a board. But if you have the choice, make sure every board member has a reason to be there and why you want them to be there. They're an advisor. They're on your side, and you can work with them and really improve the decisions. The second thing is have conversations at the beginning that maybe after a couple of years, you'll ask certain board members to leave and new ones to come in. And that happens very rarely. But, just same thing, companies outgrow sometimes their employees and their management team. They can also outgrow their board. And I wish that happened a bit more. We're very quick and easy to get rid of our management teams, but not so easy to have a frank discussion with the board members. To your second question about the meetings, I think the best practice is religiously make sure the materials are sent out 2 days beforehand, no matter what, and then demand that the board members have read the material. If they haven't, you're not going through the materials during the meeting. Have phone calls with the board members before the meeting, and then meetings as a CEO with the board members after the meeting for feedback. I think it's pretty productive to have a dinner, break the bread beforehand. Sometimes it's not possible, but try to do that. In person are great. And then as a CEO, don't be the one doing the minutes. Be focused and present at the time. Solicit opinions again. I don't think I'm forgetting anything, but those are the key factors I think work best.
Absolutely. And I think about, and so everything that you kind of listed, like my first, when I first started Xceler, I think I got all of them wrong.
Oh yeah. I was well, tell me, did you? What was the biggest mistake that you made? I'd say.
Well, all of it. I was doing the presentation like in the meeting, and I didn't send it beforehand, and I was also doing the minutes. And I was like, you said about having one. We can only have one thought in your head. We can't, like, as humans, can't really truly multitask. We can like switch really quickly, but you're still splitting. So then, this was a long time ago. It's like almost like 15 years ago. But I was like, okay, here's my deck. Also, let me take notes. And so I wasn't even present. I couldn't even ask the questions that need to be asked. And so I was doing everything wrong. But I can't be alone in that. I feel like a lot, if you're a bench scientist, you don't know how to run a board meeting. And, especially when you bring in your first, perhaps institutional capital in, there's like this level of governance. Like, who teaches governance when you're at the bench? Nobody. So I made all the mistakes.
Well, maybe in that way, it's good for new CEOs to get a mentor. Find somebody that that is willing to say, well, next time don't write the minutes. I don't want to write the minutes, but maybe Jack can write the minutes.
Yep.
Nobody wants to write minutes. That's not
no.
So it usually falls to the CEO, who should be the last person to do the minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as we evolved and the board meetings have become, we're now doing kind of exactly what you're talking about, but it's a two-way street, really. Is at least what we have found is that it's a give and take on both sides. Right. But ultimately hearing everybody out, making it a environment where people can voice their opinions, we'll always hear you out, but then ultimately it will be management's decision to, we're going to go in this direction, make that call because you're closer to it. But there's something to be said about having very opinionated board members because these are perspectives, especially when they're not in the weeds every day, that are incredibly invaluable. Because I can get tunnel vision all the time, especially, and with the team kind of we want this, we want that. And having a board member who doesn't have these kind of pressures, these everyday pressures to be I don't know, I actually, it looks to be all right. And so there's that balance and kind of give and take. Sometimes you take the advice, sometimes you don't. And, but that's, at least in my opinion, what a kind of constructive and productive board meeting usually looks like and feels like.
You raise a good point, John, because, the board cannot run the company. And it is. Yeah,
that's exactly it.
It is a CEO who's in charge. And if you don't, you don't have confidence in the CEO, there's only a couple of choices. There's only one choice, and that's, to find a new CEO. So, that's usually, it's binary. So you can't be halfway in between. And that's a good one. I think it's important, in this day, a lot of companies, you have to check and make sure you understand conflicts of interest. Saying, okay, that's okay. People can recuse themselves from decisions and back out. I'm on board of a private nonprofit. And there, one of the members said, look, if you don't have a conflict of interest, you don't have an interest. So, because people are really interested in a particular area, they're going to be in that field. But that's okay. And
it's interesting. Yeah. And also, nonprofit boards are a whole different beast too. Sometimes the,
they're publicly traded.
Yeah. And publicly traded too, where it's, I'm only familiar with the private side, but holy moly, it is, sometimes the boardroom drama can be a lot. But this, hearing your journey is so inspiring and refreshing. And I've learned a ton about, what it means to be resilient and having the ups and downs and finding new opportunities and being willing to really raise your hand and try things that are new, and also continuously learning, which is, inspiring for me. So you've been so generous with your time. So thank you. And in the traditional Biotech Startups podcast closing questions, we have two. First, would you like to give any shout outs to anyone who supported you along the way?
I think after 30 years, every job has had somebody that I cannot thank enough. I made a few names, I mentioned a few through this interview, and I've forgotten, or I've not mentioned others. So I don't want to call anybody out specifically now, but I wish there was a way to repay them the way that they supported me. And there's no way. It's usually a one-way street. They support you, and it's hard for you to return the favor. But I think through this, at least understand and pay it forward to the next person. And so that's the way that you repay the person that helped you. But every single position or job or opportunity, from doing my master's and not having a lab to do the thesis in, for Salesh Manji and Mike Nicholson to give me their laboratory to do the thesis, to bosses who let me make mistakes and didn't belittle me, to Robert Bland and Nigel Brown and Neil McCarthy to let me buy the company in 2006. There's many people I've forgotten to mention in this podcast.
And I love this question because and you talk about that one way kind of nature. Sometimes
it's
like when people bet on you, when you don't even, you haven't really like quote unquote earned it. They just take that chance on you.
Yeah.
Is incredible. Like that seems to be the through line for a lot of that. And exactly what you said is kind of like that. I can see it in your investing in board work. It's like paying it forward to the next generation and really moving the needle for those who are embarking on that journey. So I love that. And if you can give any advice to your 21-year-old self, what it would be?
I think stay curious. I think also, you'll have more in common with people of your same experience than you will with your 21-year-old. I think, because we think, well, we're one person, but we've changed so much that the 21-year-old me is different than the 70-year-old me. And that's weird to feel. And then other things like you will stop drinking at some point. So earlier than you actually do it.
Yeah. That is so funny because my wife and I, we like look back and it's like, how did we do that? And I was like,
then you got the lesson earlier.
yeah. We're just like, and also we're just like, oh, like we have like a bedtime now. Like this is like, it's like, and just like it comes sooner than you think too. Is this
right.
Like you're just like, I think when you start working, you're just like, I really. Like it doesn't, the day after, I can't do this anymore. So I'm with you on that. Well, Derek, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks.
I've had a blast. Thank you for coming on the podcast. I could do this for like another 4 or 5 hours with you, but I know you're a busy guy. So thank you again. Thank you. I appreciate the time.
Really, it's been fun. And this time has gone by really quickly talking to you today. So
I'm sure we'll be talking again soon. I'll see you later.
Bye-bye.
That's all for this episode of the Biotech Startups podcast. We hope you enjoyed our 4-part series with Derek Hennecke. Be sure to tune into our next series with Barbara Alcaraz-Silva, a scientist entrepreneur whose graduate studies focused on telomeres and DNA repair. Barbara has also worked with many startups, including co-founding her own company, Biocron. While with the Manos Accelerator, she worked as an advisor for biotech and medtech companies, providing mentorship in business, fundraising, capital, and guidance to startup companies. Additionally, Barbara worked as a senior investment fellow at Life Science Angels, investing in up-and-coming biotechs and managing investor relationships. After her time at Life Science Angels, Barbara became the director of early-stage West Coast Life Science and Healthcare at SVB, and is currently the Executive Director of Early Stage Life Sciences and Healthcare Startup Banking at JP Morgan, where she is leading the National Startup Banking Life Sciences and Healthcare practice. Barbara's dedication to building a strong community in the biotech space and her expertise in science, management, and investing makes her conversation one that founders don't want to miss. The Biotech Startups podcast is produced by Xcelience. Don't want to miss an episode? Search for the Biotech Startups podcast wherever you get your podcasts and click subscribe. Xcelience provides research labs with equipment leases on founder-friendly terms to support paths to exceptional outcomes. To learn more, visit our website www.excedr.com. On behalf of the team here at Xcelience, thanks for listening. The Biotech Startups podcast provides general insights into the life science sector through the experiences of its guests. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from the podcast is at the user's own risk. The views expressed by the participants are their own and are not the views of Xcelience or sponsors. No reference to any product, service, or company in the podcast is an endorsement by Xcelience or its guests.